Sometimes it's not the big budget titles that leave the deepest impression, but the games that surprise you with how much they accomplish on a smaller budget. These are the ones that find a way to stand out. If you're searching for some hidden gems and curious where to start, this list is for you. By the way, I'm constantly uploading new videos, so if you're enjoying this and want to see more in the future, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Here's a game that deserves to be first on the list: Kingdom Come Deliverance. Here's the thing. Players expect realism from big-budget games, right? They want immersion, intense detail, and complex mechanics. Yet, Kingdom Come Deliverance, a project with very little funding compared to those AAA blockbusters, managed to pull off something few high-budget titles have. It allowed players to navigate a gritty medieval world where every detail, from the combat system to the way your stats affect things like speech, feels rooted in realism. You're not some overpowered hero swooping in to save the world. You're a blacksmith's son with mud on your boots and a sword that can barely be held straight. The limited budget didn't cut any corners where it counts either. You still get sprawling fields, dense forests, and towns that feel like lived-in spaces. It's all wrapped up in a setting that feels like a living, breathing reflection of 15th century Bohemia. No magic, no dragons. It's just historical accuracy cranked to the max, and that didn't need big-budget cash to work. So, what about the combat system? That's where the game really draws the line between casual and hardcore. There's no flashy fantasy stuff here. It's all about swordsmanship, stamina, and timing, something that feels unforgiving but authentic. And it's not like the quests are forgettable either. They're built into the world's fabric, leaning on everyday concerns of the time. That's where the immersion hits the hardest, where every decision, roleplay, or fight isn't just for the thrill, but because this is what your character would do. Coming in next is Bright Memory Infinite. Now let's dig into Bright Memory Infinite. This one flies toward that boundary between indie devs and AAA. It's the kind of game where you're sitting there, round after round, thinking, wait, this was mostly made by one person? That hits differently when you look at those graphics. Unreal Engine 4, doing its thing, pushes the boundaries of what you'd typically expect from a AA game. You've got the ray tracing, the slick animations. They've really dialed up the sci-fi style elements. All of it comes together to feel more polished than some big budget releases that drop with performance issues or lack that visual punch. The gameplay itself, it's fast-paced, a mix of sword fighting and shooting mechanics with rapid shifts between melee and ranged combat. Players get this seamless flow, something that feels like it should be in those massive shooters, the kind that has millions backing it. The pacing hits hard since you're flipping enemies into the air, dashing behind cover, slicing right through them in milliseconds. It's not capped by some overly complex system either. It's pick up and play, but with enough depth to keep coming back. And what's wild is how tight and clean it is. You're not weighed down with filler. No drawn-out plots, no let's walk for 10 minutes while nothing happens segments. It's just concentrated action. By the end of it, you've got this feeling of experiencing something familiar but somehow more intense, sharper, and maybe even better than what those larger AAA offerings have delivered recently. Next, we've got Bramble the Mountain King. This game taps into something truly special. It takes players through a Scandinavian-inspired world filled with mythological creatures, stories deeply tied to Nordic folklore. Now, there's always talk about immersion, right? But where Bramble takes it to another level is in how the world feels more like a storybook you've stumbled into. A tale that's halfway between dark fairy tale and horror. And the budget for this one? Nowhere near what the big AAA games pull, yet it crafts an atmosphere that doesn't just match those titles, but maybe even surpasses them. What's kind of remarkable is how it balances beauty and dread. You'll be wandering through peaceful, enchanting landscapes one minute, and then bam, you're facing something terrifying and unsettling the next. It's not jump scares everywhere though. The fear comes from the atmosphere, the unsettling feeling that there's always something lurking in the shadows waiting for you. There's a special kind of tension. Visually, the game punches well above its weight too. From the lighting to the meticulous detail and creature design, everything feels polished in a way you wouldn't expect from a mid-tier budget title. You're not just running from threats, you're experiencing the world. The characters, the beasts, their stories woven into this dreamlike, unsettling adventure. And even though it's a linear progression, it feels organic. It's like you're unraveling a dark fable, more grounded in folklore than fantasy. You're not just a tourist here. These environments, they pull you into their weird, magical, twisted little universe even more than polished AAA projects. Next up is Soulslinger Envoy of Death. So, Soulslinger Envoy of Death has this vibe that feels more like a fusion of familiar elements from different genres, meshing roguelike gameplay with Western gunslinger aesthetics. The blend is not something you see often, and that's where it stands out from big releases. You're roaming a Wild West afterlife, sniping down enemies, but with skills and upgrades adding layers on top that keep each run feeling fresh. It's quick on its feet with a simple but addictive flow. Run, shoot, die, repeat. But beyond just the gameplay loop, Soulslinger thrives in its stylistic atmosphere. Something about games set in Western worlds usually feels like it needs the polish of a gigantic budget. However, this game manages to pull you into those barren, dusty landscapes with a minimalist charm, a stripped-down but highly effective art style. The environments may not be sprawling metropolises or finely detailed forests, but they work perfectly inside the game's roguelike structure, offering just enough variety without feeling repetitive. The gunplay, though, that's where the game really plays its card. You've got these satisfying, fast-paced duels, making every headshot land with impact. And then there's the whole death mechanic, where you're essentially battling your way through the afterlife to get stronger and come back for more. It's not trying to reinvent the wheel or be flashy, it's just doing what it wants and doing it well. You'll find those old-school indie vibes that thrive on fun, simplicity, and grit instead of throwing in filler content to pad things out. Another solid entry on the list is Redout 2. Alright, so in the grand scheme of futuristic racers, Redout 2 is the type of fast-paced arcade experience that feels like a modern tribute to the classics, like F-Zero and Wipeout. It takes you into these gravity-defying, neon-lit racetracks, finely tuned for those who love high-speed precision racing without all the fluff that bloats some of today's larger racing titles. There's something refreshing in the way it strips things down to pure velocity and leaves you at the mercy of your reflexes. No massive logistics system layering over your races here, just speed. The thing Redout 2 nails is that tight control over every twist and turn. You feel like you're gliding with fine-tuned precision over these impossibly designed tracks. Gravity working in ways that just melt your sense of what's up and what's down. There's real mastery involved, and the skill ceiling, it's high. You spend a good chunk of the game trying to perfect your problem solving on the fly, keeping up with twists, loops, and ridiculous track enhancements that try to throw you off your groove. Not to mention, it's visually striking. Each track feels alive with its vivid colors and sci-fi backdrops, yet not bloated with unnecessary distractions. The sound design pulls its weight too. Those speed boosts and engine roars really dial into your ears. It's the kind of game that remembers fun and intensity are what racers truly crave, leaving out the extra bits that don't serve the core experience. Next up is Hades 2. Supergiant Games knows how to make games feel different, but still rooted in the basics of fluid, addictive gameplay, as seen in Hades 2. Now, it's still in early access, so everything isn't quite finalized yet, but the framework already promises great things. It takes a lot of what Hades fans loved, the roguelike dungeons, fast-paced combat, and myth-drenched story, and slides in some new twists and characters, all while expanding on that same satisfying formula. The thing Hades 2 does impressively in these early builds is how it plays with the relationships between gods, myths, and underworld politics, but still keeps you invested in that repeat run after run. It's like building on the lore and action from the first game without overstuffing it with unneeded complexity. And then there's the character development. Each interaction you slowly unravel as you dive deeper into the inescapable loop of action builds connections in more organic ways, keeping everything personal, yet grand in mythic scale. Combat-wise, it's all about the fluidity. Each ability, weapon, and power-up scales differently with the available gods for any given run, encouraging experimentation. It keeps combat from feeling stale, and with how responsive movement is, every dodge, every hit lands and moves you closer to perfecting the playstyle that suits your current godly boon setup. If that tight flow works so well in the original, it's somehow even more elevated here. Fans of Hades will find home again, while newcomers can still jump in without feeling lost in the lore. Moving on to Call of Cthulhu. Lovecraft's world is tricky to bring to life. You've got cosmic horror, madness creeping in, and this overall vibe that's more about what you can't see than what you can. Yet, Call of Cthulhu manages to get it right without needing the backing of those big budget games. It's not a loud game, and it doesn't try to be. You're playing as a private investigator, and the game leans into the mystery, pulling you deeper into its eerie, unsettling narrative with each clue you uncover. What it does so well is atmosphere. This isn't a game dependent on huge set-piece moments or jump scares, which is usually where the bigger horror games tend to go. Instead, every creaky floorboard, every shadow lurking in the corners of your vision works to build tension. You feel more like you're learning about the horrors, as opposed to just running from them, which makes it stand apart. The sanity system, that's where things get really interesting. As madness takes hold and you delve deeper into the unknown, you're not sure what's real and what's your character slowly unraveling. You don't need all the polished graphics or massive environments to sell that sinking feeling of unease. Call of Cthulhu uses what it's got, a well-crafted, stripped-down survival horror experience that quietly pulls you in with psychological dread rather than bombarding you with high-octane action or production values.
Where the hell is the chopper?
Transportation is en route. Hold your ground. We will have you out shortly.
Let's continue with crime boss Rockay City. Crime boss Rockay City throws you into a modern-day gangster's paradise and has a delivery that's sharp, stylish, and doesn't try to inflate itself with unnecessary additives. The moment-to-moment flow of the gameplay means you're engaging more in fast-paced heists, shootouts, and juggling relationships with an array of colorful criminal figures. What makes Crime Boss stand apart from other, bigger, mob-tied games is how straightforward it stays with its design. Gritty, but not overthought. From the streets of Rockay City, filled with neon lights and dirty alleyways, to the strategic approach to criminal empire building, there's this vibe that's halfway between an old-school heist film and a modern action game. You're piecing together a crime empire, but nothing drags you into long, convoluted build-up missions. The story feels more modular. You're not being dragged into lengthy side plots if you don't feel like delving into the extra bits. One thing Rockay City knows how to do: pulling off a heist. It's got the energy of Payday, but it's more stylish, comedic even, with characters that feel unique thanks to some B-movie charm. It works precisely because it's not made from the same over-polished mold. There are scrappier, edgier moments where it risks shaking things up with humor and chaos rather than aiming for that Hollywood-level cinematic feel. It banks on speed and ferocity over a padded-out narrative. Up next is Banisher's Ghosts of New Eden. Some might have mistaken Banisher's Ghosts of New Eden for one of those big releases, but despite its large map and polished environments, it's rooted in that tighter AA game structure. Now, here's the standout thing. This world is astonishingly vast. You're a ghost hunter dealing with your own personal tragedy, traveling through these massive landscapes that shift between the spiritual and physical realms. There's a lot to explore, and it delivers a sense of scale that surprisingly matches some of the biggest names out there, without scaring you away with unnecessary filler content. The dynamic between the two protagonists, one very much alive and the other, well, a ghost, that's where the game's emotional weight really hits. They use their unique perspectives to influence your choices, and those choices carry heavy consequences. Not just for the plot, but also in the gameplay loops where players juggle between doing what's right or what gets the job done. It's a game where moral decisions matter, layered into this otherworldly, heartfelt story about loss, duty, and what it means to protect those still living. For a studio that insists on being AA, the production values don't feel like any corners were cut. Character animations, environmental interactions, all of it feels meticulously crafted not just for looks, but to immerse players in the thick of this difficult journey. The size and detail in the world, paired with the emotionally loaded decisions, make Banishers feel bigger than you'd expect from a game fitting into the AA bracket.
As the governor of New Mexico was paying for the kid's apprehension, Garrett was able to hire every gun hand in Lincoln County.
Let's not skip over Call of Juarez Gunslinger. There's something about Call of Juarez Gunslinger that just gets it right when it comes to that classic, guns ablazing Western experience. It's not trying to be a realistic depiction of the Wild West, nor does it lean into large, sprawling worlds or intricate mechanics. Instead, it strips the genre to its bare essentials: fast, arcade-style gunfights and super stylized storytelling. This is the kind of game that doesn't rely on a huge team or budget, but still manages to deliver more fun than many bigger titles out there. The whole storytelling mechanic is brilliant. You're recounting your past as a legendary gunslinger, and the game plays around with unreliable narration in a way that keeps things dynamic. One moment, you're blasting your way through a saloon, only for the narrator to say, "Wait, that's not how it happened." And suddenly, the layout shifts, enemies reappear, and you have to adapt in real time. It's playful and keeps you on your toes. Visually, it nails that comic book, spaghetti western vibe. You've got that sepia-toned aesthetic, but it's not about hyper detail. It's more about the exaggerated, over-the-top feel of classic western films. And the gunplay, it's tight. Each headshot feels so satisfying, enhanced by a slow-motion mechanic that lets you play every high-noon duel like you're Clint Eastwood. Simple, engaging, and designed for players who just want to have fun, without a loadout of extra features to weigh it down. We're halfway through, and now it's time to highlight The Sinking City. The Sinking City takes a step beyond its cousin, Call of Cthulhu, and drops you into a massive, open-ended mystery. That's where the two games diverge. If Call of Cthulhu was all about creeping dread, The Sinking City leans into exploration, deep investigative gameplay, and a world that's just falling apart at the seams. This drowned metropolis feels like a game trapped between two worlds, much like its protagonist, existing somewhere between a detective thriller and mind-bending cosmic horror. The big thing that sets this apart is the open-world environment. It's not a tightly controlled sequence of events like many horror games. Instead, you've got this decaying city to pick apart at your own pace, solving crimes and slowly uncovering this nightmare-inducing eldritch presence. That freedom to explore gives The Sinking City an edge over some AAA horror titles that rely too much on scripted scares. You're left to roam, in some ways creating your own tension as you uncover more about the city's hidden horrors. Another standout here is the investigation system itself. It doesn't hold your hand, and there's no follow the clues mechanic baked in too clearly. Instead, you have to piece everything together on your own, making you feel like a detective in every sense. The cosmic horror influence is there, but it's subtle, more about atmosphere, strange anomalies, and a creeping dread that slowly builds beneath the city's fog-filled streets. Next on the list is Lost in Random. This game feels like it was designed in a dream world, with a weird Tim Burton meets board game aesthetic that proves that big ideas don't need big studios behind them. The charm here isn't in massive explosions or heaving action sequences. It's about the quirky, unpredictable nature of a world divided into 6 dice-ruled kingdoms, each of which gives off its own distinct flavor of peculiarity. You've got this beautiful blend of combat, storytelling, and just straight-up creative design. The standout feature here is the dice-based combat system. You've got real-time action mixed with some deck-building elements, and your dice partner, Dicey, keeps the tension on high with every roll. It's this constant balance between strategy and chaos. You might think you've got the fight under control, and then you roll something unexpected that completely changes the flow of battle. It's not randomized chaos, though. Everything is carefully structured to make sure each battle feels random, while still letting players maintain a sense of agency. Visually, the game is almost like a children's nightmare. It's all there in the jagged architecture, the lopsided towns, and the creepy but endearing character designs. Each zone is so distinct, like there's this mini-story and theme within every corner of the game, all tied together by the sinister queen who controls everything. The way Lost in Random handles its narrative and environment design gives off a surreal atmosphere that's impossible to forget, even long after you've turned off the screen. Another game you'll want to keep an eye on is No Rest for the Wicked. I have already featured this game before, but I had to do it again as it definitely needs some attention. No Rest for the Wicked crafts its own space in the action RPG scene, even while it's still cooking in early access. If you're a fan of dark, moody settings and gritty combat, this one feels like it's designed with you in mind. It's a far cry from the polished, overly safe fare many bigger games aim for. Maybe it's rough around the edges, and maybe that's what makes it work. The gameplay shines with its combat mechanics. This isn't the floaty, easy-to-pick-up style of some larger games. The way you're forced to balance the chaotic spell slinging while managing limited resources feels more deliberate, like every move matters. It's punishing too. There's a method to mastering it. The enemy designs are super creative, pulling from all kinds of nightmarish imagery. They're not just cannon fodder, they require different strategies, forcing you to adapt constantly. What really adds to the appeal, though, is the dark, almost gothic atmosphere. You're wandering through these landscapes, and it feels oppressive in the best way. The level design evokes this constant sense of dread, with architecture and backgrounds that look purposefully decayed, like the world itself is one step away from collapsing in on itself. It's gritty, heavy, and the experience feels intense in a way that pulls you deeper into its clutches. And as I mentioned earlier, this game is still on its early access. However, I strongly recommend it if you enjoyed this kind of genre. Coming up next is Another Crab's Treasure. Another Crab's Treasure skitters into a familiar lane, especially if you've just checked out No Rest for the Wicked. Here's a game that takes the damage-heavy combat you see in roguelikes, but coats it in a whimsical underwater armor. Instead of demons and purgatory, you're in shell-to-shell combat as a humble crab trying to reclaim its stolen shell. That's the kicker, though. This game leans into creativity by making the environments and ocean floor full of oddball treasures, turning our little crab protagonist into a scrappy underdog rather than a medieval warrior. What it shares with No Rest for the Wicked is that same challenging combat, though it's delivered a bit lighter here. You're still dodging, blocking, and counterattacking with weapons scavenged from the ocean floor, but it plays with a bizarre charm. One moment you could be fighting with a bottle cap as a shield. The next you're strapping on a can or broken glass for extra protection. It's all very familiar in mechanics, yet executed with a sense of humor and playfulness that edges it away from a dark experience. The standout here is the world itself. You don't trek through hellfire or brimstone. Instead, you've got a bright, vibrant undersea landscape filled with coral tunnels, sunken ships, and all sorts of oceanic oddities. It's like exploring a living, breathing ecosystem, except everything around you is trying to destroy you. Just the sheer absurdity of wielding trash in tactical combat makes it feel fresh, combat-heavy but fun, and a bit ridiculous.
Am I alright to get by, pal?
It's alright. You have to go around, Kaz.
This next game is all about Still Wakes the Deep. Now, Still Wakes the Deep taps into a wholly different kind of terror. You're on an oil rig in the middle of the ocean, and something unseen, something terrifying has gone horribly wrong. It's shaping up to be a tightly knit thriller, leaning into survival horror, but without throwing hordes of enemies at you. This game banks on atmosphere and isolation as its primary form of horror, and it's hard to beat that eerie feeling of being stranded in the middle of nowhere, completely alone. The setting itself is a defining feature. You're stuck on a labyrinthine oil rig, and every narrow corridor, every creaky platform amplifies the tension to claustrophobic levels. It's dark, damp, and every gust of wind or groan of metal feels like it could either be your savior or the signal that you're about to meet something you're not ready for. This isn't one of those fast-paced, action-heavy experiences. Instead, Still Wakes the Deep seems more about creeping dread, akin to classic horror where the enemy's presence is more terrifying in suggestion than in actuality. While many survival horror titles hint at danger from the supernatural or malevolent monsters, this one plays with the notion that the rig itself might not be the only thing that's unstable. There's psychological horror layered in, a sense that the deeper you get into the rig, the harder it becomes to trust your own senses. It's less about showing you the monster and more about the fear of not knowing what it even is. It feels more intimate, more character-driven, without needing a sprawling world-sized adventure to build up your anxiety. Coming in next is Asterigos Curse of the Stars. This game takes you on a journey through a beautifully crafted world inspired by Greek and Roman mythology, meshed into a colorful action RPG package. The thing about Asterigos is that it doesn't rely on the typical high-stakes, dark, bleak narrative you'd expect from most myth-inspired titles. Instead, it brings a sense of wonder. You've got this bright, lush world filled with colossal statues, ancient temples, and creatures pulled straight from mythological imaginations. But it's all wrapped up in a surprisingly whimsical tone. What really makes Asterigos stand out is how it embraces variety in combat. You get 6 interchangeable weapons that let players choose their playstyle, whether you feel like wielding a giant hammer or dual daggers. The fluidity with which you can switch isn't something present in every action RPG, especially those with more button masher combat systems. It forces you to think somewhat tactically, especially when facing down the game's bigger mythological bosses, who require more than just a one-size-fits-all approach. The art direction is stunning. It's not trying to compete with ultra-realistic depictions. It leans more into stylized visuals, which gives everything a timeless storybook feel that echoes the ancient inspirations behind it. That way, even if you're getting pummeled by Minotaur-like enemies, the world still feels inviting, holding a sense of adventure rather than pure dread. It's got that balance most AA games strive for, a charming world with deeper than expected gameplay mechanics that tie into both the story and exploration. Now, let's move on to Absolver. Absolver brings that fluid, martial arts-based combat that fans of Sifu may find strikingly familiar, and that makes sense, given they're from the same developer. The game is all about mastering combat stances and moves, giving players a level of control that weapon-based games don't come close to. You're not just blocking or dodging randomly here. Every shift in movement, every step, every hit feels meaningful. The combat system itself is flexible, built for experimentation, and kind of feels like crafting your own fighting style on the fly. What separates Absolver from your typical action brawler is this customizable combat deck that lets you string different moves into combos as you improve. You can decide how you want your character to fight by setting up dodges, counters, and chains of punches and kicks that reflect your personal rhythm of play. Because of the PvP and PvE crossover, you're bumping into live players while exploring, tossing them challenges, or learning from their techniques. Combats don't feel scripted, which gives this constant sense of surprise, something rare for action-driven games. Visually, Absolver goes for a muted, minimalist art style. There's a simplicity to it that allows the fluidity of animations to really shine, with characters moving like they're swept up in a dance more than a fight. The world? It's deep with lore, though not force-fed through massive cutscenes, leaving players to pick up bits of the story through exploration and interaction with enemies turned allies. It's part fighting game, part RPG, all blended together inside a mysterious, abandoned world.
Got it.
The vehicle is waiting downstairs. You should hurry. You don't have much time.
Up next is Atomic Heart. Going in a wildly different direction, Atomic Heart is this off-the-rails, wonderfully bizarre take on an alternate history, Soviet-inspired world. It's part action RPG, part shooter, part fever dream. What makes Atomic Heart fit in this list is how it balances between high-octane action and this deeply weird world that demands exploration. You're fighting homicidal robots, wielding both guns and weirdly advanced, almost steampunk-like tech in a utopia that has gone terribly wrong. It's not just typical shoot-everything in sight chaos, there's a mystery pulling it all together, with creepy undertones of retro-futurism gone awry. The standout here is the setting. It's like someone took a futuristic vision of the Soviet era, stirred in a bunch of 1950s-style sci-fi, and unleashed it with a twist of absurdity. You're walking through laboratories filled with robots that look equal parts human and machine, old factories twisted inside out with insane experiments, and lush landscapes that hide terrifying beast machines beneath them. It creates a blend of beauty and menace that feels almost overwhelming at times, in a distinctly unique way. Then there's the combat, where you can switch between traditional shooting mechanics and using powers. Telekinesis, freezing enemies, creating electric charges, all packed into this fast, fluid system. It's like BioShock in its pacing, with some melee twists thrown in to shake things up. The world building and gameplay here craft a universe that's larger than life without constantly holding your hand, letting players explore and survive in its crazy, surreal universe while piecing together the mysteries along the way.
Fucking Hoji. Played me like a fiddle. Damn it!
We need Hoji's key to defeat that dragon. I know you're not a very trusting person.
You can't make this list without mentioning Shadow Warrior 3. You look at Shadow Warrior 3, and you'd swear it belongs in the same big league category as many top-tier action shooters. The graphics are stunning, the explosions are loud, and the movement is so smooth that you almost forget it's working with a much smaller budget. Yet, despite all that, it still manages to bring that non-stop high-octane action from start to finish, rivaling some of the biggest first-person shooters out there. The game is lean in the best way, cutting all the fluff and focusing purely on insane, fast-paced combat. Every moment you're blasting through hordes of enemies, performing parkour, or slicing through demons with a katana, it's adrenaline pumping constantly. Where you'd expect some games to ease off with cinematic breaks, Shadow Warrior 3 keeps the energy dialed all the way up, throwing you straight back into combat with almost no downtime. The humor is still there. Lo Wang's got his crass jokes and offbeat quips, which gives it an irreverent, fun atmosphere that breaks the tension of the insane enemies you're mowing through. What really seals the deal is the level design and verticality. As you zip around using grappling hooks, switching weapons on the fly, or activating brutal executions, it feels like a wild dance of destruction. There's a fluidity to it, never too complicated, but insanely satisfying. The melee and ranged weapons, when combined, let you pull off some truly ridiculous and destructive combos. And visually, it's a feast for the eyes, especially for a project that didn't have the backing of multi-million-dollar budgets. To wrap things up, we've got Kunitsugami Path of the Goddess. This game probably won't hit mainstream recognition, and that feels intentional. This is a game with a deeply focused identity, rooted in Japanese mythology, spiritual battles, and beautiful, surrealistic landscapes. It's not designed to compete for attention on Game Pass against high-explosive, fast-paced blockbusters. Instead, Kunitsugami speaks to a niche audience, players who appreciate more artistic, cultural experiences woven into their action games. Where the game truly stands out is in its visual style. Rather than going for realism, the environments feel almost dreamlike, with vibrant colors and ethereal designs reminiscent of traditional Japanese paintings. Every part of the world has a handcrafted feel, like walking through an ancient myth that's been brought to life. The line between the spirit world and the physical world blurs constantly, drawing you into moments of haunting beauty. The enemies, too, are manifestations of defiled spirits, wear the markings of folklore, terrifying and elegant at once. Gameplay-wise, it's not all flash and chaos. There's a delicate approach to its combat. It blends fast-paced slashing with moments of tactical movement as you purify corrupted spirits, but within a defined rhythm. It asks for precision, timing, and a thoughtful approach over just rushing in with wild attacks. It's less about action for action's sake and more about the spiritual weight behind every encounter. It certainly won't pull in every player. It's more meditative, culturally infused, and focused on atmosphere than the adrenaline-heavy titles many gamers demand. Still, for those who resonate with its core, Kunitsugami ushers in a world of myth, artistry, and refined combat. It will most likely gather a cult following that's more about appreciation and immersion than widespread popularity. If you enjoyed this video and found some new games to check out, don't forget to give it a like. And if you want to see more content like this, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss any future uploads. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll catch you in the next one.